Morning everyone. Today let's talk about engine oil and filters. One of the most common questions I get is, Meredith, which engine oil do you prefer and why? Well, there's such a variety. When you walk into any auto parts store or engine shop or anything like that, there's a whole aisle full of engine oil, additives, all kinds of stuff, and they all say they're the best. So how do you determine what's right for your engine? Before we get started, we need to cover a couple engine oil basics, like what's the difference between gasoline engine oils and diesel engine oils, what viscosity is and how it reads, and why you need to be careful about what you're picking. Now, one of the first things to consider is what type of engine are you actually running? Are you going to be running a diesel engine, a newer or an older one? Are you going to be running a steam engine? Are you going to be running a gasoline engine? Because that's going to determine what kind of oil you choose. I can't use a modern diesel engine oil in my steam engine. I need an oil that's specially formulated to handle the extra water, extra moisture, and other stuff typically found in something like a steam engine. Whereas steam engine oil is not formulated to handle the pressures and temperatures typically found in what would be considered a modern diesel. When I'm mentioning diesel oil versus other types of oil, this is an automotive oil and this is a diesel oil. And one of the things to check is the label. And you can see the API service CK4. That stands for a compression ignition engine, a diesel. And this oil is specially formulated to handle the extra levels of soot. This oil, if you look at the label, it says API service SN. That's for spark ignition. So this is an automotive oil that's really meant for gasoline engines, and it's not going to have the formulations meant to handle the extra soot from a diesel. I see a lot of people using, the straight 30 weight in their diesel engines, and they actually make dedicated diesel oils that are straight 30 weight. So make sure to read the label. Now, one of the rumors that I often hear, especially with the old guys, is they don't make things like they used to. And that's true. What's the difference between this from the 1950s or 60s and this, which I can buy today? Which one's better? Well, this is a paraffin-based oil, and it doesn't have the detergents and additives that modern oils do. So would this work? Probably, but I wouldn't want to use it in a modern engine because it wouldn't be able to handle the temperatures, the shear pressures, things like that our modern oils can do. So if you've got this laying around, maybe keep it for display. Now, a common theme with me, and if you've watched any of my videos before, is I'm going to tell you to check your manual. I didn't design these engines, they did, and so they're going to know exactly what kind of oil they want used inside their engine. So it's important to check the specs before running whatever type of oil. Now, a common issue amongst some of these manufacturers is, believe it or not, the manual doesn't always tell you that. If that's the case, then reach out to a specialist and they can help you pick the correct oil. If you're dealing with an older and even antique engine, sometimes the specs they give you no longer exist. In this case, a lot of times you can go online and find the modern equivalent that will meet the specification. Now, one of the first questions I get is, Meredith, what viscosity do I use in my engine? And as mentioned before, I'm always going to say refer to your manual. Now, the manual typically will give you what viscosity they prefer for cold or warm climates. That may change depending on how worn out your engine is. You can always run something a little heavier in a really, really tired, worn out engine. However, you want to be careful with that because more modern engines are actually calling for thinner and thinner oils, and you don't want to throw like a straight 40 weight in like a modern Subaru or something like that. That could cause a lot of damage, and so you really want to talk to somebody who knows what they're doing if you're dealing with like a really tired engine and you want to run something thicker. Now, viscosity comes in a couple different forms. When you're looking at a bottle of oil, this is called a multi-viscosity oil. It's a 15W40, which is commonly found in, most diesel engines, especially in the marine world. And the W, a common misconception about that is that stands for weight, and that is not actually true. That actually stands for winter. And so this is like your winter performance and your summer or high temp performance. So these are actually measured in two totally separate units. The 15W is actually measured in centipoise, and the 40 is measured in centistokes. So they refer to two totally different kind of operational, behaviors depending on the temperature. And so your manual is going to dictate, what they want. If you happen to be, say, up north in a climate that can get really, really cold, they're going to give you the number that they want to see, so that way your engine doesn't run dry for any period of time. Sometimes you're going to run across an oil that's a straight weight. So this is a straight 30 weight. And this is essentially the range that it performs during all operation. And certain diesels actually do call for straight weight oils. The Detroit diesel 2-strokes happen to call for like 40 weight oil only. They don't want to see a multi, viscosity oil. If that's all you have, it will certainly get you home, but you don't want to run it over the long term because that could do, long-term damage to your engine. So make sure to follow what your manual specifies. Another question I often get is, Meredith, should I run synthetic or non-synthetic in my engine? So this is a non-synthetic oil that I run. And most of the engines that I encounter in the recreational world, unless they're very new, very modern, and they actually call for synthetic, I actually run non-synthetic, or maybe even the Chevron synthetic blend at the most. These are modern enough. They do have good additive packages. They do a really good job at keeping your engine clean. And since they're dedicated diesel engine oils, that additive package is designed to kind of handle things like soot and keep soot under control, which is kind of the most critical thing in a diesel engine. So can you run synthetic? Yes, you can. In fact, many people have proved that if you switch it up to synthetic, you're probably not going to develop any new leaks. I think Project Farm actually did a video on that, and some other people have talked about it. However, you don't need to run synthetic if the engine doesn't call for it. I've torn many engines apart that have never seen synthetic oil in their life, and they're actually quite clean as long as you stick to a good oil change interval and don't let the oil get contaminated. Now, a good thing to understand is every modern oil is going to have what's called a base oil and an additive package. And each brand is going to have, whatever base oil they're using plus whatever additive package. And so that's kind of the difference between all these different brands of oil. So the Valvoline stuff you saw earlier, that racing oil, one of the things in their additive package that, they're advertising is that they have a very high zinc content. And zinc is typically used for, friction. It helps with friction modification, helps with wear and tear, particularly for flat tappet and pushrod engines, and particularly during break-in. So having that high level of zinc can be really, really good when you're breaking in an engine like that. For normal operation, though, high levels of zinc isn't always a good thing. You're also going to have things like calcium, phosphorus, all kinds of other additives that do different things within the oil package. And so modern oils are going to have things like anti-foam agents. They're going to have different friction modifiers. They're going to have things that help keep the oil from becoming too acidic, during operation. Because with temperature changes, with pressure, stuff like that, the oil is going to break down over time. And so each manufacturer kind of, formulates their own additive package, which helps with the engines they're trying to, kind of create oils for. So there's certain companies that really specialize in different types of racing oils or heavy duty oils or something like that. In this case, you know, Chevron, Shell, you know, a lot of the heavy duty diesel oil manufacturers, they create additive packages that help with, you know, what a heavy duty diesel might be going through. They also create additives that help maintain soot levels and help with fuel mileage in more modern engines. So you're not going to get all the information on the back of the bottle, but, you know, there's lots of YouTube videos on what, you know, this formulation is made up of, and that can help you choose what you want. Having a super high level of zinc isn't always the answer, so that's something to pay attention to. Zinc can, you know, fight things like calcium and stuff like that, so it's not always the best to, you know, be adding zinc or using a super high zinc oil. You know, do your research. One of the YouTube channels that I follow who's really, really good in terms of the science, talking about all the additives, is the Motor Oil Geek. He actually tests all these different oils, both automotive and some diesel, and he talks about how, you know, like adding stuff to your oil can be bad, how all these things work together, and what you really want to choose based on how you're using your engine. A really common question that I get asked often is, Meredith, what do you use for a break-in oil when you rebuild your engines? And on older engines, I do tend to use, you know, a break-in oil if it calls for it. However, a lot of the diesel engines actually call for their regular specified oil. So, you know, something like Shell Rotella T4, something like this. I run this in my engine. It's a non-synthetic oil, has a higher zinc content. It works really great for a flat tappet pushrod engine. I don't need to run any special racing oils, and I don't need to add anything to this because the additive package within a modern oil like this is more than enough. So the big question I know you guys are all asking is, what oil do I prefer? I use either Shell Rotella or Chevron, and they both have unique packages that help, you know, all diesel engines. I've seen these perform over the long period of time. I've seen them, you know, when I'm tearing the engines apart, and both of them have proven themselves to be, you know, good, clean running oils. So both of them, you know, are rated for diesel engines. They both do very well with flat tappet pushrod engines. I believe Shell has a slightly higher, you know, zinc content. It does do a little bit better in cold performance. However, the Chevron has a bit of a unique package where they have a little bit more moly and boron and some stuff like that, which are really good for wear protection. So a lot of fleet owners really prefer, you know, Chevron. So those are the two I pick from when I'm servicing customers' engines. I've run both in my truck and on my boat, and I've been really, really happy. I've torn my engines apart before. I've seen, you know, what several years of using one of these oils does, and I've been happy with both. A couple final notes about engine oil and things I've learned along the way, both from watching, you know, Lake Speed on YouTube, experiencing things in the real world from like oil sampling and testing, is the first thing is, if you have old oil laying around the shop, I mean, this is like super old. This is actually just a display can. But if you have oil that's, you know, 4 or 5 plus years old, the additive package can actually fall out of suspension, and the oil is no longer going to do what you want it to do in terms of protecting your engine during operation. So if you have really old stuff laying around, this is particularly something I see on boats where maybe a new owner is kind of digging through, you know, their lazarette or something, and I'm on board to change the oil, and they'll pull out this old can of oil that's clearly more than 5 years old, and they'll say, "Hey Meredith, can we use this?" No. Now the actual base oil is not going to break down. However, the additive packages, like the friction modifier, the anti-foam agents, stuff like that, are going to fall out of suspension, and they'll actually be at the bottom of the can, meaning when you pour it in your engine, you're not going to have those protective things working for you. So just go buy the new jug of oil and get rid of the old stuff. Another thing that I actually used to use quite a bit and now I no longer use is like oil treatments. I used to run like Lucas oil stabilizer. These are also, really old display, pieces that I have on top of my toolbox, but they still sell these things, the, oil thickeners, oil treatments, stuff that has like extra zinc, extra additives of whatever. And there are multiple people and YouTube channels where you can actually see that adding even more additives can reverse the good things that, your regular oil additive package is already doing. So you don't want to like just add a ton of zinc because you think zinc is good. You don't want to add, a ton of other kind of chemical agents to your oil additive package because they can react in a really bad way and your oil now is not going to perform the way you think it's going to perform. Lucas oil stabilizer is actually something I used to run in my old Toyota Tercel. I even ran it in my truck for a little while thinking, hey, it's like really high mileage, thicker oil might help. Well, after watching a couple people talk about it and test what it actually was, turns out it's nothing more than an oil thickener, and that's not good for my truck at all. All it's doing is diluting that additive package that I actually want, and so I stopped using it immediately, and I will encourage the same for you guys. The next thing I want to talk about is oil filters. Oil filters can come in a whole variety of different brands, different styles, and how do you know what to use and what not to use? There's so much selection, and are you actually getting what you pay for? Now, like oil, there's a whole variety of filters that we can choose from when we go to service our engines. And this stuff I tend to be fairly particular about because there is a difference in filter quality. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard of, maybe really not so good companies like Fram or even CarQuest or something like that. And yeah, there's a reason for it. If you're curious, look it up on YouTube. There's lots of filter cut apart videos where you can see kind of the inside quality of a lot of these spin-on filters. Now, typically, a lot of engines I recommend what the manufacturer recommends, right? Because all the filters here are going to at least meet the minimum spec. So, the Yanmar filters, I always use these filters on Yanmars because I know they're going to meet the specification that Yanmar puts out. And as far as the aftermarket filters, I'm not always sure that they meet the same specification. For my Dodge, I tend to choose one of, what Cummins recommends, and typically that's Fleet Guard. So Fleet Guard is a Cummins, approved company that actually has an entire department, R&D department, dedicated to filtration. And same with Caterpillar and Baldwin. So these three companies I tend to kind of gravitate to the most when it comes to good quality filters. The insides of these three filters are pretty much the same because they're for my Dodge truck. Cat is probably my favorite filtration company. Now, this particular filter I actually believe is made by Fleet Guard for the Cummins 5.9. So I still know it meets, Cummins specifications. However, once you get into the larger Caterpillar filters that are actually made by Caterpillar, you'll find that their filters don't have any metal pieces in them. Their department decided that, if the metal corrodes or breaks apart, that could be, a major, failure case for an engine. And so the inner pieces inside this filter, like the cage that holds the filter material and stuff like that, is actually made of like a plastic of sorts. So if it were to break apart and go through the engine, it's not going to destroy the engine. So Caterpillar filters tend to be really, really high quality, especially once you get into the bigger, heavier equipment filters. And of course, at a minimum, they're going to meet their own specs. So on my truck, I run, you know, like Fleet Guard or Caterpillar. If I'm working with, you know, like another larger diesel, Baldwin is also really, really good. They have a department dedicated to filtration, and so they make very high quality filters for their purpose. If it's a smaller engine like a Kubota or a Yanmar or something like that, I tend to stick with either the manufacturer specs or, you know, find a good aftermarket like a Baldwin or something. I know Baldwins make a lot of filters for like universal engines or Kubota style engines. And I know Baldwin, since they make a good filter, that would at least meet the spec. Where I get a little bit wary is like walking into an auto parts store. If you guys are curious, of course, you know, go scour YouTube. You're going to find a lot of videos on the quality of different filters and why they may be good or bad. But, you know, so I'll tend to stick to the manufacturer's specifications, or I'll find a good known aftermarket company that, you know, is going to make a good quality product, because it's not only the oil that needs to do its job, it's the filter. And if the filter doesn't perform, it doesn't matter what kind of oil you have in the engine. Now, any good quality oil filter is going to have a couple basic components. And today I'm talking about, you know, standard spin-on filters, right? The filters that we see with our O-rings, they screw on. And the filter that I have in my hand here has a paper element that's not interchangeable, right? You can't change the inside element to this thing. You change the entire assembly, essentially. This filter is designed to meet Yanmar's minimum specifications. And so, you know, it's going to be equipped with like an anti-drain back valve, and it's also going to be equipped with a bypass. So if this filter never got changed and it clogged up so bad that oil couldn't pass through it, oil will be allowed to bypass it, because running your engine with no oil is always worse than running your engine with dirty oil. So that's why I always prefer, you know, good quality filters, because they're going to have things like the anti-drain back and like the bypass technology built into them. So even in the most critical of conditions, they'll still allow your engine to get lubrication. Situations that really, really require this are like where you'd see like a military operation. So, for example, if the Coast Guard was out rescuing you, or they were out in the middle of the ocean doing some sort of operation, and for whatever reason the filters didn't get changed, do you want the engine to seize up while they're coming to save the day because, you know, the filter was low quality and wouldn't bypass? Or would you rather their engine run on a little bit of dirty oil, keep running, keep functioning, so they could get to you and save you? That's the difference between, you know, something that's well built and maybe something that looks the same, but it's really cheaply built. Now, there are times where choosing the manufacturer, you know, filters can actually let you down. So for a long time, I was going straight to the dealer and buying Subaru brand filters. Well, me being the nerd I was doing research, and I discovered that Subaru actually was having Fram make their filters. So the light blue filters that they used to sell were no different than the orange and black cheapo filters from like O'Reilly's. And they were such poor quality, there was actually quite an uprising about it. And I had to search high and low in order to find the real Japanese, you know, Subaru filter that wasn't sold here in the United States. And so that was kind of a bummer, because it's like, man, all I want is, you know, a good filter to keep my car going. And you think that buying the brand name filter from the manufacturer is going to be good. And, you know, they decided to cheap out on something critical. So luckily Subaru finally kind of changed their game. They're now producing much higher quality filters, but for a while I was, you know, forced to kind of source my filters Luckily, I was able to get them through WorldPack, which is an automotive distributor. But I was really bummed that they would trick their customers like that, especially on something so critical. So if you're curious about the quality or where the filter is coming from, definitely do your research, because you might discover something you don't like. And that does make a difference when it comes to taking care of your engine. Another thing to be aware of, especially when it comes to servicing your engines, and this goes for a variety of different industries, is a lot of manufacturers are going to give you service intervals that are longer than you think makes sense. And so we've seen this a lot in the automotive industry, where manufacturers are saying, oh, you can push 7 to 10,000, even 15,000 mile oil change intervals. And the reason for that is, on paper, it makes the cost of ownership look a lot cheaper. And so somebody may be more likely to buy the vehicle or buy the piece of equipment thinking, oh, it's okay to do that. And the truth is, it's not okay to do that. So I've actually seen this with a couple diesel manufacturers too, where, you know, like the normal oil change interval is 100, 200-ish hours. And I'm starting to see 300 to 500 hours on some, you know, service manuals, and I would never recommend going that far depending on, you know, how you're running the engine. So a good rule of thumb, especially for us recreational boat owners, is change the oil annually, or every 100 to 150 hours or so, because that does kind of equate to, you know, a 3,000 or 4,000 mile oil change. And you can't go wrong. Plus, most of our engines, you know, they don't require that much oil. And so, you know, I would rather change oil more often and limit how many problems I have down the road than try to save a little bit of money and save, you know, some oil by changing my oil every 500 plus hours. Especially if you're running your engine in a really heavy duty or dirty environment. That's certainly something that, you know, comes into effect when it comes to servicing your engine. If you're working your engine in a really bad environment, or you're idling it more often or something like that, you're going to want to change your oil more often, because we want that soot and all the dirt accumulation that the oil is capturing to get out of your engine. And if it's allowed to circulate through your engine for a long period of time, you're going to have a ton of wear and tear, especially on your cylinder walls and piston rings. And that's going to equate to a rebuild sooner than later. So I'd rather you change your oil sooner than later than be talking to me about a rebuild. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope you learned something. I wanted to break down some of the technical stuff about oil and filters so that the average boater like you and me can understand it. You know, we don't need to always know the high stakes technical information, but we do need to know what the right type of oil or the right type of filter may be for our application. And it really does depend on how you operate your engine, what type of environment you're in, stuff like that. And so you guys may have to do a little bit of research based on where you're at in the world, because, you know, the type of oil and filters that I use here may not necessarily apply to your application. However, I want to spark those questions so you're able to go out and do the research or talk to the right people about finding the right things for your engine, because this stuff does actually make a difference. There's a lot of misconceptions out there about what works and what doesn't. Some of the older beliefs, older technologies, while they may have been good back in the day, they're not good anymore. And so that's why I wanted to talk about it today. So that way you guys kind of know what to look for when you go to service your engine. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm already working on the next video. So if you have comments, suggestions, let me know, you know, what you like to run on your engine. And I will plan on seeing you guys in the next one.